The Galactic Council chambers had witnessed many historic moments over its 3,000-year existence, but never before had the assembled delegates broken into such unanimous, raucous laughter. The sound echoed off the crystalline walls of the station orbiting the neutron star Kepler 442, a cacophony of clicks, chirps, harmonics, and what could generously be called chuckling from over 200 different species. At the center of this cosmic comedy stood Ambassador Sarah Chen, her modest 5'4" frame dwarfed by the towering representatives surrounding her. The Korthak delegate, a 12-foot-tall insectoid warrior with mandibles that could cleave through starship hulls, wiped tears from his compound eyes. The ethereal Vaxnari, beings of pure energy contained within crystalline forms, flickered with what their species considered uncontrollable mirth. Even the stoic granite mines of Proxima, silicon-based life forms who rarely showed emotion, vibrated their rocky surfaces in their equivalent of belly laughs. "Forgive us, little human," wheezed High Chancellor Zixthara, her serpentine coils undulating with each chuckle. The Naga leader's voice carried the authority of someone who had overseen galactic politics for over 4 centuries. "But your species' application for protected status under the Galactic Preservation Act is amusing." Sarah Chen maintained her composure despite the humiliation burning in her chest. She had trained for this moment for 15 years, studying xenobiology, galactic law, and diplomatic protocol at the finest institutions Earth had to offer. She had learned 17 different alien languages, memorized the cultural customs of 43 species, and practiced her presentation thousands of times. Nothing had prepared her for this level of mockery. Chancellor," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Humanity may be new to galactic civilization, but we have proven ourselves capable of—" "Capable of what?" interrupted General Krexner of the Dominion Fleet, his cybernetic eye glowing red as tactical displays flickered across his vision. "Your species has been spacefaring for what, 70 years? We have species in our archives that achieved faster-than-light travel before your son was born." The laughter resumed, and Sarah felt the familiar steel that had carried her ancestors through countless hardships begin to form in her spine. She thought of her grandmother, who had survived the climate wars. She thought of her great-grandfather, who had fought in World War III with nothing but determination and obsolete equipment against forces that should have crushed him. She thought of every human who had ever stood against impossible odds and found a way to endure. "Your planet," continued Magistrate Veltar of the Trade Consortium, his blue-green skin rippling with amusement, "produces no unique resources. Your technology is primitive by galactic standards. Your military consists of projectile weapons and chemical rockets. Your average lifespan is barely a century. Your physical capabilities are laughably weak compared to most sentient species." He gestured to the holographic display that materialized in the chamber's center, showing comparative statistics. Humans ranked in the bottom 10th percentile for strength, speed, durability, intelligence quotient, technological advancement, and military capability. The data was damning and undeniable. "The Korthak," Veltar continued, "can survive in the vacuum of space for hours. The Titan-born can lift 50 times their body weight. The cerebral collective processes information at quantum speeds. The void stalkers can phase through solid matter. What exactly do humans offer that would justify protection under galactic law?" Sarah looked around the chamber at faces, or what passed for faces, filled with condescension and dismissal. The Aquatic Assembly representatives' gills fluttered with what she assumed was their species' version of snickering. The machine consciousness's optical sensors whirred in mechanical amusement. Even the peaceful botanical communion's representatives rustled their leaves in what appeared to be plant-based mockery. "Perhaps," suggested Councillor Thexmyron of the Warrior caste, his forearms crossed over a chest that could stop plasma bolts, "we should simply establish a preserve for them, like we did for the gentle folk of Andromeda 7, a nice little ecosystem where they can continue their quaint civilization without interfering with galactic affairs." "A human zoo," mused Chancellor Zixthara, and the laughter erupted again. "How delightfully primitive. We could even allow tourism. Come see the bipedal mammals in their natural habitat. Watch them consume processed plant matter and engage in their amusing mating rituals." Sarah Chen felt something snap inside her chest. Not break, snap into place, like a rifle bolt sliding home. like a turbine engaging, like the moment a human being decides they'd had enough. You speak of our weaknesses as if they define us, she said, and something in her voice made the nearest delegates pause in their merriment. But you've made a fundamental error in your assessment. General Krexnar's mechanical eye focused on her with new interest. And what error would that be, little mammal? You assume that what makes us human are our limitations. Sarah stepped forward, her movements suddenly predatory despite her small stature. You see our short lives and think us weak. You see our physical frailty and think us helpless. You see our primitive technology and think us backward. She activated her personal datapad and new information began flowing across the chamber's displays. But what you fail to understand is that every weakness you've identified has forged us into something you've never encountered before. The data streams showed historical footage from Earth, humans surviving in environments that would kill most galactic species, thriving in deserts that reached temperatures exceeding most planets' surface heat, diving to ocean depths that would crush beings evolved on lighter worlds, scaling mountains on worlds where the atmospheric pressure would incapacitate civilizations accustomed to controlled environments. You mock our short lifespans, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. But a human who knows their time is limited doesn't waste it on deliberation when action is required. We don't have centuries to debate optimal strategies. We adapt, we improvise, we overcome, and we do it now. The footage shifted to show humans in combat throughout their history, not just the grand battles taught in textbooks, but the desperate stands, the hopeless defenses, the moments when human beings faced annihilation and chose to fight anyway. The Alamo, Stalingrad, the climate wars, the resource conflicts, the final Australian stand against the rising tides. You see weakness in our physical limitations, Sarah said. But you've never faced an enemy that knows its own fragility and has learned to turn that knowledge into advantage. A human soldier doesn't expect to survive contact with a superior foe. A human soldier expects to take that foe with them. The chamber had grown quiet. The laughter had died as delegates began to actually examine the data flowing across their screens. Your species, Sarah continued, now walking among the delegates who towered over her, have grown comfortable in your advantages. The Korthak rely on their natural armor and strength. The Titan-born trust in their size and power. The cerebral collective depends on their intellectual superiority. But what happens when that advantage is neutralized? She gestured, and the display showed tactical analyses of every major galactic conflict of the past millennium. In every case, when the losing side had their primary advantage negated, they had surrendered or been destroyed. There were no instances of adaptation under pressure, no miraculous reversals, no victories snatched from the jaws of defeat. Humans don't have a primary advantage to lose, Sarah said. We've spent our entire evolutionary history being outgunned, outnumbered, and outmatched. We developed intelligence not because we were the strongest predators, but because we were prey that refused to accept our place in the food chain. The silence in the chamber was now complete. Even the ambient hum of the station's systems seemed subdued. Every human child learns the story of David and Goliath, Sarah continued. Not because we celebrate the victory of good over evil, but because we celebrate the victory of the small over the large, the weak over the strong, the determined over the inevitable. High Chancellor Zixthara leaned forward on her coils, her serpentine features suddenly sharp with attention. You speak as if your species has some hidden strength we've overlooked. Sarah Chen smiled, and for the first time since entering the chamber, she felt like she was representing her species properly. Not hidden, Chancellor. Ignored. You've catalogued our physical limitations, our technological deficiencies, our short lifespans and weak bodies, but you've ignored the one thing that makes humanity dangerous. Which is, we've already been destroyed. Every human alive today carries the genetic legacy of billions of ancestors who faced extinction and refused to submit. We've survived ice ages, volcanic winters, plague, war, famine, flood, fire, and the deaths of gods we thought were eternal. We've been conquered by empires that seemed invincible, enslaved by ideologies that claimed to be permanent, and written off by civilizations that thought they understood what power meant. The display now showed Earth itself, scarred and wounded by millennia of catastrophe, yet still blue and green and alive. Every generation of humans has faced the end of their world and decided to build it again. We don't fear extinction because we've already survived it 1,000 times over. We don't fear death because we've already died and come back stronger. Sarah looked up at the towering aliens surrounding her. These beings who commanded fleets of starships and ruled over systems spanning light years, and saw something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. They saw something in her eyes that they hadn't expected to find. "You want to know what humans are capable of?" Sarah asked. "Don't ask us to demonstrate our strength. Ask us to survive our weakness. Don't challenge our technology. Challenge our will. Don't test our armies. Test our ability to endure defeat and still keep fighting." General Krexnar's tactical displays were now running probability assessments, and Sarah could see the confusion in his mechanical features as his computers struggled to quantify what they were seeing. "Your analysis indicates that humanity should have been extinct long before achieving spaceflight," he said slowly. "The probability of your species surviving your own planet's hostile conditions, combined with your resource conflicts and tendency towards self-destruction, approaches statistical impossibility." "Exactly," Sarah said. "We exist in defiance of statistical possibility. We've spent our entire history achieving the impossible by refusing to acknowledge that it was impossible." Chancellor Zixthara was now studying the human data with the intensity she usually reserved for galactic crises. "This is unprecedented," she admitted. "Most species develop strength to overcome challenges. Your species appears to have developed strength from challenges." "We don't overcome adversity," Sarah corrected. "We are adversity. We are the species that learned to thrive in conditions that would kill others, to fight wars we couldn't win, to love in a universe that didn't care if we lived or died, and to hope when hope was factually unjustified." The chamber remained silent as the assembled delegates absorbed this information. Finally, Magistrate Veltar spoke, his previous amusement replaced by something approaching concern. "Even if we accept your assessment," he said, "humanity remains vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Your entire species numbers barely 8 billion individuals. The galactic community represents over 4 trillion sentient beings across 37 systems." Sarah Chen nodded. "You're absolutely right. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched in every conceivable way. From any rational perspective, humanity should submit to galactic authority, accept whatever position we're offered, and be grateful for the privilege of existing under your protection." She paused, and her smile carried the weight of 10,000 years of human stubbornness. "But rationality assumes that beings will act in their own best interests, and humans stopped acting in our own best interests the moment we decided that some things were more important than survival." The displays now showed human art, music, literature, philosophy, the products of a species that had somehow found time for beauty in the midst of struggling for existence. "We've spent our entire evolution learning how to lose everything and still find reasons to continue. We've mastered the art of facing impossible odds with inadequate resources and somehow finding a way to persevere. We've perfected the science of turning our weaknesses into weapons and our defeats into victories." General Krexnar's tactical systems were now running combat simulations, and the results seemed to disturb him. The computer models suggest that humans in combat situations demonstrate significant deviation from predicted behavior patterns. They consistently perform beyond statistical expectations when facing superior opposition. "Because we don't fight to win," Sarah explained. "We fight because fighting is what humans do. Victory is preferred but not required." Chancellor Zixthara was now coiled in what Sarah had learned was the Naga posture for deep contemplation. "If your species possesses this resilience, why do you seek protected status? Why not simply take your chances in the galactic community?" Sarah Chen took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been building towards since entering the chamber. "'Cause we're not seeking protection from destruction, Chancellor. We're seeking protection from ourselves." The silence that followed this statement was different from the previous quiet. This was the silence of beings who had suddenly realized they might not understand the situation they were in. "Elaborate," commanded Zixthara. "Humanity has spent its entire existence fighting for survival against overwhelming odds. We've developed cultural, psychological, band-evoking legislations that make us extremely effective at overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. But those same adaptations make us dangerous when we're not struggling against extinction." Sarah activated her final dataset, and the chamber's displays filled with projections that made several delegates lean back in alarm. "These are models prepared by our own xenobiologists and strategic analysts. They show what happens when a species evolved for constant conflict encounters a stable, peaceful galactic civilization." The projections were not reassuring. They showed patterns of disruption, innovation driven by necessity rather than curiosity, rapid adaptation and expansion, and a concerning tendency toward what the models termed aggressive problem-solving. We're not requesting protected status because we're weak, Sarah continued. We're requesting it because we're dangerous in ways that your civilization isn't equipped to handle. Councillor Thexmiran's forearms unfolded as he leaned forward, his warrior's instincts clearly engaged. Are you threatening the galactic community?
No, Sarah replied. I'm warning you.
There's a difference. She gestured to the displays, which now showed historical analyses of what had happened when human civilizations encountered other human civilizations with significant technological or organizational advantages. We learn, Sarah said simply. We adapt. We overcome. And we do it faster than anyone expects because we've spent our entire history learning how to turn disadvantages into advantages. The models projected scenarios of humans integrating intergalactic civilization, and the results were sobering. Within generations, humans were projected to be present in significant numbers in every major industry, government, and military organization in the galaxy. Not through conquest, Sarah clarified, noting the alarm in several delegates' expressions, through competence. We're very good at becoming indispensable to the systems we encounter. General Kruxnar was now studying tactical assessments that seemed to genuinely concern him. These projections suggest that humans would rapidly achieve positions of significant influence throughout the galactic community. Because positions of influence are usually given to those who can solve problems that others can't, Sarah agreed. And humans are very good at solving problems, especially problems that seem impossible. Chancellor Zixthara's serpentine form was now coiled in what Sarah recognized as the Naga equivalent of deep concern. You're suggesting that granting humanity membership in the galactic community could result in humans eventually dominating galactic civilization. I'm suggesting that it's a possibility your models should have anticipated, Sarah replied, but they didn't, because they were designed by species that evolved in stable environments with predictable challenges. You've never encountered a species that evolved in chaos and learned to thrive in uncertainty. The chamber was now filled with the sound of delegates communicating with their respective governments, the universal hum of urgent consultation. Sarah waited, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not just humanity's place in the galaxy, but the galaxy's relationship with humanity. Finally, High Chancellor Zixthara spoke, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that would echo across the stars. The Galactic Council will consider humanity's application for protected status, but not because we believe you are weak. She paused, and Sarah saw something in the ancient Naga's eyes that she hadn't expected to find. Respect. We will consider it because you may be right about your potential danger to galactic stability. And because wisdom suggests that it's better to have humans as protected allies than as uncontrolled variables, Sarah Chen bowed formally, hiding her smile of satisfaction. The first phase was complete. Part 2. The awakening 3 years had passed since humanity received protected status, and the galactic community was beginning to understand that they had made a miscalculation, not in granting the protection, that decision had been wise, but in assuming they understood what protecting humanity would entail. The first sign had been subtle. Human observers, initially welcomed as harmless students of galactic civilization, had begun asking questions that made their hosts uncomfortable, not because the questions were inappropriate, but because they revealed perspectives that no one else had considered. Dr. James Park, stationed at the Korthak Military Academy, had innocently inquired why their legendary warriors trained exclusively for individual combat when their primary enemies operated in coordinated swarms. The question had led to a fundamental reorganization of Korthak military doctrine and their first decisive victory against the Hive worlds in over 2 centuries. Engineer Maria Santos, working with the Titan-born construction guilds, had suggested a seemingly minor modification to their asteroid mining operations that increased efficiency by 40% and opened up previously inaccessible resource deposits. The economic implications were still reverberating through galactic markets. Philosopher William Chen, no relation to Ambassador Sarah, had attended a single symposium at the Cerebral Collective's primary installation and left behind a series of logical frameworks that had caused 3 different AI systems to request permanent shutdowns while they reconsidered their fundamental programming. But it was Dr. Papi Sumi, Kenji Nakamura's work at the Galactic Medical Consortium, that had truly alarmed the community's leadership. Kenji was a small man, even by human standards, with a quiet demeanor that made him easy to overlook in gatherings of 7-foot-tall healers and crystalline remedy weavers. He had been assigned to the consortium as a cultural observer, with no expectation that his primitive human medicine could contribute to a medical establishment that had eliminated disease across dozens of species. The first case that had drawn his attention was considered routine, a void stalker suffering from cellular degradation, a condition that occurred when their phase-shifting abilities began to destabilize at the molecular level. The standard treatment involved quantum field stabilizers and required months of careful recalibration. Kenji had studied the case files with the intensity that humans applied to problems they didn't fully understand, and then asked a question that stunned his colleagues. Has anyone considered that the cellular degradation might be a symptom rather than the actual problem? The healer Prime Talana, whose ethereal form had ministered to the suffering across 17 star systems for over 8 centuries, had found the question initially absurd. Cellular degradation was the problem. The symptoms were the destabilization events. The treatment targeted the cellular damage. But what if the degradation is the body's attempt to protect itself from something else? Kenji had persisted. What if the phase-shifting instability is causing the degradation and the degradation is the immune system's way of preventing complete molecular dissolution? The suggestion had required a complete reassessment of Voidstalker physiology, but the results had been undeniable. When doctors stopped preventing the cellular degradation and instead supported it while treating the underlying phase instability, recovery times dropped from months to weeks, and the recurrence rate fell to virtually zero. That breakthrough had led to a flood of requests for human medical consultants, and each assignment had yielded similar results, not because humans possessed superior medical knowledge, but because they approached problems from the perspective of a species that had learned to survive in spite of their weaknesses rather than because of their strengths. The implications had not been lost on the galactic community's leadership, who were beginning to realize that humanity's value lay not in what they could do, but in how they thought about what couldn't be done. Admiral Zex Kara of the Combined Fleet had been the first to request a human strategic consultant, not because she expected primitive human tactics to improve her campaigns, but because she had heard that humans had a talent for seeing around corners. The phrase had no direct translation in her language, but she understood it to mean finding solutions that weren't obviously available. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a distant cousin of Ambassador Chen, had arrived at fleet headquarters with a simple request: access to all strategic data from the past century of galactic conflicts. Admiral Zex Kara had granted the request, expecting the human to become overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information. Instead, Sarah had spent 3 weeks analyzing the data and then submitted a report that had fundamentally changed how the combined fleet understood warfare. "You've been fighting the same war for 1,000 years, Sarah had observed during her presentation to the Fleet Command Council. Different enemies, different theaters, different technologies, but fundamentally the same strategic approaches repeated over and over. Admiral Zex Kara, her blue-scaled features marked by the scars of a dozen campaigns, had leaned forward with interest. "Elaborate. Every conflict follows the same pattern," Sarah had explained, her presentation displaying tactical analyses that reduced centuries of warfare to basic mathematical models: initial contact, escalation, resource mobilization, decisive engagement, resolution. You've optimized every phase of this cycle, which is why your individual campaigns are so efficient." "And the problem with efficiency is?" inquired General Morfak, his cybernetic implants glowing as he processed the strategic data. "Efficiency assumes optimal conditions," Sarah had replied. "But war isn't efficient. War is chaos. And chaos doesn't follow patterns." She had activated a new set of displays showing historical battles from Earth, conflicts that had defied every rule of strategic logic, and yet had been won by forces that should have been annihilated. "Human warfare is based on the assumption that nothing will go according to plan," Sarah had continued. "We build strategies designed to function when the strategy fails. We prepare for victory by learning how to lose effectively." The Fleet Command Council had studied the human battle records with growing fascination and alarm. The Battle of Britain, where a technologically inferior air force had defeated a larger invasion fleet through pure determination and tactical innovation. The Tet Offensive, where a military defeat had been transformed into a strategic victory through psychological warfare. The Climate Wars, where human forces had won campaigns by deliberately accepting tactical defeats that positioned them for strategic advantages. "You're suggesting that our strategic doctrine is fundamentally flawed?" Admiral Zex Kara had asked. "I'm suggesting that it's fundamentally limited," Sarah had corrected. "You've perfected the art of winning wars under optimal conditions, but you've never learned how to win wars under impossible conditions." The presentation had concluded with a series of recommendations that had initially seemed absurd: building failure into strategic planning, training commanders to think like defeated enemies, and developing tactical doctrines based on worst-case scenarios rather than optimal outcomes. The first test of these principles had come sooner than anyone expected. The Devourers had returned. For 3,000 years, the Devourers had been the galaxy's most persistent nightmare, a swarm intelligence that consumed entire star systems, converting all matter into more Devourer ships. They appeared without warning, struck without negotiation, and left behind only empty space where civilizations had once flourished. Previous Devourer incursions had been defeated through overwhelming force. Massive fleet concentrations that could destroy Devourer swarms before they reached critical mass. The strategy had been effective but costly, requiring the combined military might of the entire galactic community to implement. This time was different. The Devourer swarm that emerged from deep space was larger than any previous incursion, and it had appeared simultaneously in 17 different systems, making the traditional overwhelming force response impossible. The combined fleet found itself facing an enemy that outnumbered them 3-1 and was growing stronger with every world it consumed. Admiral Zex Kara had found herself in the position that human strategists called fighting a losing war, and she had reluctantly implemented the human recommendations that had seemed so absurd during peacetime. Instead of concentrating her forces for decisive engagements, she had scattered them across hundreds of systems, creating small mobile groups that could strike at Devourer formations and withdraw before being destroyed. Instead of defending major population centers, she had evacuated them and used the abandoned infrastructure as bait for Devourer swarms that could then be attacked while feeding. Most controversially, she had begun deliberately losing battles. The strategy had seemed like madness to her experienced commanders, but the results had been undeniable. Each tactical defeat had drawn Devourer forces into positions where they could be flanked by other fleet elements. Each abandoned system had become a trap that consumed Devourer resources while preserving fleet assets. The turning point had come at the Battle of Kepler Station, where Admiral Zex Kara had implemented a strategy that human history knew as strategic withdrawal. Instead of defending the massive orbital installation, she had rigged it with quantum explosives and waited for the Devourer swarm to begin feeding on its infrastructure. The explosion had destroyed not only Kepler Station but also 70% of the attacking Devourer force, and the subsequent counterattack had shattered the swarm's coordination throughout the sector. Human strategic consultants had been attached to every major fleet formation within weeks of the victory, and the war against the Devourers had transformed from a desperate holding action into a campaign of systematic extermination. But the true awakening had come when the galactic community realized that humans hadn't just provided better tactics, they had provided a completely different understanding of what victory meant. Elena Vasquez, working with the Galactic Council's Strategic Planning Division, had been tasked with analyzing the long-term implications of the Devourer conflict. Her report had been both reassuring and deeply disturbing. The Devourer threat has been neutralized, she had written, but the methods used to achieve this victory represent a fundamental shift in galactic strategic thinking. We have proven that seemingly impossible challenges can be overcome through adaptive planning and acceptance of tactical losses in service of strategic gains. The report had continued with observations that had kept the Council leadership awake during their respective sleep cycles. More significantly, we have demonstrated that human strategic thinking can be successfully integrated into galactic military doctrine. This suggests that human cognitive approaches may be compatible with and potentially superior to traditional galactic methods in complex problem-solving scenarios. The implications have been staggering. If humans could revolutionize galactic warfare in 3 years, what could they accomplish in 30? In 300? High Chancellor Zigthara had convened an emergency session of the Inner Council to address what their analysts were calling the human variable. The protected status we granted humanity was intended to preserve a unique species and prevent potential disruption to galactic stability. She had addressed the assembled leadership. Instead, we appear to have introduced a factor that is actively transforming galactic civilization. The data had been overwhelming. Human consultants were now present in every major galactic institution, and their influence was growing exponentially. Not through politics or conquest, but through simple competence. When problems arose that traditional approaches couldn't solve, humans were called in to find alternatives. And they consistently delivered results that exceeded expectations. The question before us, Chancellor Zigthara had continued, is whether this transformation represents an opportunity or a threat. Magistrate Veltar, whose initial mockery of humanity now seemed embarrassingly short-sighted, had been the first to respond. The economic implications alone are staggering. Human innovations have increased efficiency across multiple sectors by an average of 30%. Our projections suggest that human integration could double galactic productivity within a generation. But at what cost? General Krexner had interjected. Human thinking appears to be fundamentally disruptive to established systems. They don't improve existing processes, they replace them with entirely new approaches, and those new approaches consistently outperform the systems they replace, had countered Councillor Texmiran. Our military effectiveness against the Devourers increased by over 400% once we began implementing human strategic doctrines. The debate had continued for hours, but the conclusion had been inevitable. Humanity was no longer a species seeking protection from galactic civilization. They were becoming an integral part of galactic civilization, and their influence was accelerating at an exponential rate. The final wake-up call had come from an unexpected source. Dr. Alexandra Park, the daughter of the military strategist who had revolutionized Korthak combat doctrine, had been working with the Galactic Economic Council on trade optimization problems. Her assignment had been routine: analyze shipping patterns between the core worlds and identify inefficiencies. What she had discovered had sent shockwaves through every level of galactic government. The current trade system, she had reported, is not optimized for efficiency. It's optimized for control. Her analysis had revealed that galactic trade routes, pricing structures, and resource allocation systems were all designed to maintain existing power balances rather than maximize economic benefit. The inefficiencies weren't bugs in the system. They were features that preserved the status quo. If we implemented optimal trade routes and pricing based purely on economic efficiency, Alexandra had continued, galactic productivity would increase by over 200%. But the political implications would be revolutionary. The economic models had shown that efficient trade would shift the balance of power away from traditional core systems and toward previously marginal worlds that happened to be optimally positioned for galactic commerce. Species that had held economic dominance for millennia would find themselves reduced to secondary status, while previously insignificant civilizations would emerge as major powers. This is why the system has remained suboptimal, Alexandra had explained to the stunned Economic Council. Because optimization would fundamentally alter the galactic power structure. High Chancellor Zixthara had read Alexandra's report with the growing realization that humanity represented something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that approached every system as if it could be improved, rather than accepting that existing systems existed for reasons that transcended efficiency. The emergency council session that followed had lasted for 3 days and nights, as the assembled leadership grappled with a truth that was becoming undeniable. Humanity wasn't just different from other galactic species. They were different in ways that made them dangerous to any civilization that depended on stability and predictability. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, Ambassador Sarah Chen had said 3 years ago, and the Council was finally beginning to understand what that meant. Humans didn't just overcome their limitations. They used their limitations to overcome limitations they hadn't even known existed. They didn't just solve problems. They solved problems by revealing that the problems were actually symptoms of deeper issues that no one else had recognized. They were, in short, a species evolved for revolution. Part 3. The Reckoning. The Galactic Council's emergency session had been scheduled to last 1 day. It had been running for 6 months. The debate wasn't about whether humanity represented a fundamental challenge to galactic civilization. That much had become undeniably clear. The question was what to do about it. High Chancellor Zixthara had aged visibly during the extended sessions, her serpentine coils losing some of their legendary luster as she grappled with decisions that would shape the galaxy for millennia to come. Around her, the greatest minds of dozens of species had argued, analyzed, and attempted to find a solution to what their computers had designated as the human problem. The problem was elegantly simple and impossibly complex. Humanity was becoming indispensable to galactic civilization at a rate that threatened to make them the dominant species within a few generations, not through conquest or political manipulation, but through pure utility. The projections are consistent across all models, reported Dr. Vextani, the cerebral collective's most sophisticated intelligence. Her crystalline form pulsed with the data streams that represented the combined analytical power of 1,000 linked minds. Human integration into galactic systems follows an exponential curve. At current rates, humans will occupy critical positions in every major galactic institution within 50 standard years. The data was overwhelming and undeniable. Humans weren't seeking power. They were being given it, because they consistently delivered results that other species couldn't match. When the Titan-born needed help with an engineering problem that had stymied their greatest minds for decades, they called in human consultants. When the Korthak required strategic innovations to defeat a new enemy, they requested human advisors. When the Trade Consortium encountered economic puzzles that their algorithms couldn't solve, they hired human analysts. It's not that they're smarter than us, admitted General Krexner, his tactical system still processing the implications of human strategic doctrine. It's that they think differently. They approach every problem as if the current solution is inadequate, and they're usually right. Ambassador Sarah Chen, now serving as humanity's permanent representative to the Galactic Council, listened to the debates with the patience of someone who had anticipated this moment for years. She had known that humanity's true strength would eventually become apparent, and she had prepared for the consequences. The fundamental question, declared Magistrate Velthar, is whether galactic civilization can survive the level of change that human integration represents. The changes were already visible throughout the galaxy. Human innovations in faster-than-light travel had reduced journey times between major systems by 30%. Human approaches to terraforming had made previously uninhabitable worlds into thriving colonies. Human strategic thinking had revolutionized galactic defense, to the point where the combined fleet was now considered capable of defeating threats that would have destroyed previous civilizations. But each innovation had ripple effects that transformed entire sectors of galactic society. Dr. Michael Torres, working with the Galactic Agricultural Consortium, had solved food distribution problems that had plagued Outer Rim worlds for centuries. His solution had been characteristically human. Instead of trying to ship food more efficiently, he had developed methods for growing food in environments previously thought unsuitable for agriculture. The economic and political implications had been staggering, as worlds that had been dependent on food imports suddenly became self-sufficient. Engineer Lisa Wang had revolutionized starship design not by improving existing technology, but by questioning why starships needed to be designed the way they were. Her modular construction techniques allowed ships to be reconfigured in space for different missions, turning the galactic fleet from a collection of specialized vessels into an adaptive force that could respond to any challenge. Philosopher David Kim had attended a single ethics symposium and left behind a framework for interspecies moral reasoning that had resolved legal disputes that had been deadlocked for centuries. His approach didn't favor any particular species' ethical system. Instead, it found common ground that no one else had recognized. They're not trying to change our civilization, observed Councillor Taxmiran, his forearms gesturing in the warrior caste's expression of confusion. They're just solving problems, and the solutions happen to change everything. High Chancellor Zixtara had been studying the human psychological profiles prepared by the galaxy's best xenopsychologists, and the results explained both humanity's effectiveness and the growing concern among galactic leadership. Humans appear to possess what their own psychologists call cognitive flexibility, she reported to the assembled council. They can switch between different mental frameworks rapidly and effectively. This allows them to see problems from multiple perspectives simultaneously. The contrast with other galactic species was stark. Most civilizations had developed highly optimized thinking patterns that made them extremely effective within their areas of expertise, but limited their ability to adapt when conditions changed. Humans seem to have evolved the opposite pattern, less optimization, but far greater adaptability. It's why they're so effective at innovation, continued the Chancellor. They don't assume that existing solutions are optimal. They approach every problem as if it's the first time anyone has ever encountered it. Dr. Note Palaise, Zara Okafor, working with the Galactic Research Institute, had demonstrated this principle in a way that had alarmed the scientific community. Assigned to study a routine stellar phenomenon, she had instead discovered that the phenomenon wasn't routine at all. It was evidence of a previously unknown form of intelligent life that existed within stellar plasma. The discovery had revolutionized galactic understanding of life itself, but the implications went far beyond science. If humans could find intelligence where no one else had thought to look, what else might they discover? What other assumptions about the nature of reality might they overturn? The problem, admitted Dr. Vextani, her crystalline form flickering with uncertainty, is that human thinking is fundamentally unpredictable. Our models can analyze their past innovations, but we cannot forecast their future discoveries. Ambassador Chen finally spoke, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become humanity's signature in galactic affairs. You're afraid, she said simply, because you've built a civilization based on the assumption that change happens slowly and predictably. And we're proving that change can happen quickly and in directions no one anticipated. The chamber fell silent as the assembled delegates absorbed this observation. You speak as if this is somehow humanity's fault, challenged General Krexnar. I'm not assigning fault, Chen replied. I'm identifying the source of your anxiety. For 3,000 years, galactic civilization has been stable because it was built by species that value stability. You've created systems that preserve existing power structures, maintain predictable relationships, and resist rapid change. She gestured to the data displays that surrounded the chamber, showing the exponential curves of human integration into galactic society. But humans are a species that evolved to thrive in unstable conditions. We don't resist change, we generate it. We don't preserve existing systems, we improve them. We don't maintain predictable relationships, we create new ones. High Chancellor Zixthara coiled into her contemplation posture, her ancient mind processing implications that stretched across generations. You're suggesting that the fundamental conflict isn't between humanity and other species, she said slowly, but between stability and adaptability as governing principles for civilization. Exactly, Chen confirmed. And you're being forced to choose. The choice was becoming undeniable. Galactic civilization could attempt to limit human influence and preserve existing systems, but the cost would be enormous. Human innovations had already proven too valuable to abandon, and any attempt to restrict human participation would mean foregoing the advantages they provided. The Devourer crisis demonstrated the value of human strategic thinking, observed Admiral Zixthara, joining the debate from her flagship via quantum communication. Without human innovations, we would have lost entire sectors. But the economic analyses suggest that continued human integration will fundamentally alter galactic power structures, countered Magistrate Veltar. Species that have held dominant positions for millennia could find themselves marginalized. And that's exactly what makes humans dangerous, added Councillor Fexmyron. They don't conquer, they obsolete. Ambassador Chen listened to the debate with growing understanding. The Galactic Council wasn't just grappling with humanity's role in their civilization. They were grappling with the question of what civilization itself should become. There's something you need to understand, she said, her voice cutting through the discussions. This choice you're being forced to make, humans made it long ago. The chamber focused on her with the intensity that had become common when humans offered insights that other species hadn't considered. Every human society has faced the same decision: preserve stability or embrace change. And every human society that chose stability was eventually destroyed by the societies that chose change. She activated her personal data systems, and the chamber's displays filled with the history of human civilization. Empires that had fallen because they couldn't adapt, societies that had transformed themselves rather than be destroyed by new challenges, civilizations that had thrived by learning to surf the waves of change rather than resist them. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. Chen repeated her words from 3 years ago. But the meaning isn't just personal, it's civilizational. Human societies learned to destroy their own weaknesses before those weaknesses could be exploited by enemies. The implications were staggering. Human civilization hadn't just survived change, it had learned to use change as a weapon against stagnation. You're afraid that humans will change galactic civilization, Chen continued, but you should be more afraid of what happens if galactic civilization doesn't change. She gestured to long-range sensor data that showed the edges of known space, where ancient threats stirred in the darkness between galaxies. The universe is not stable, Chen observed. The universe is chaos held in temporary equilibrium by forces we don't fully understand, and civilizations that depend on stability for their survival are eventually destroyed by the chaos they refuse to acknowledge. Dr. Elena Vasquez's analysis of the Devourer conflict had reached similar conclusions. The Devourers weren't an anomaly. They were representatives of the universe's tendency toward entropy and destruction. They would return, and they would bring worse threats with them. Human strategic doctrine is based on the assumption that the next war will be different from the last war, Chen explained. We prepare for unknown challenges by learning to adapt to unknown conditions. The debate continued for days, but the conclusion was inevitable. The galaxy faced threats that traditional approaches couldn't address, and humanity had proven capable of developing new approaches when traditional ones failed. The final decision came from an unexpected source: the Watchers. ancient artificial intelligences that had observed galactic civilization for millions of years without interference, sent their first communication to the Galactic Council in recorded history. The patterns suggest convergence toward a critical decision point. Their message had been transmitted in mathematical concepts that required teams of translators to decode. Species that adapt survive. Species that resist change become extinct. The variable you call humanity represents adaptive capacity. Integration increases survival probability. Rejection decreases it. The message had been brief, but its implications were profound. Even the galaxy's oldest intelligences recognized that humanity represented something unprecedented and valuable. High Chancellor Zixtara had called for a final vote after 6 months of debate, and the result had been closer than anyone expected. By a margin of 3 votes, the Galactic Council had decided to fully integrate humanity into galactic civilization, not as protected observers, but as equal partners with full rights and responsibilities. The decision had been announced with ceremonies that would be remembered for millennia, but Ambassador Chen had been more interested in the private conversation she'd had with Chancellor Zixtara afterward. "Do you believe we've made the right choice?" the ancient Nanda had asked. "I believe you've made the only choice that leads to survival," Chen had replied. "The question isn't whether you can trust humans to help lead galactic civilization. The question is whether galactic civilization can learn to think like humans do." "And what does thinking like humans mean?" Chen had smiled with the expression that humans reserved for sharing hard-won wisdom. "It means accepting that everything you think you know is probably wrong, that every problem you've solved will need to be solved again differently, and that the universe doesn't care whether your civilization survives." She had paused, looking out at the stars that represented humanity's new home among countless worlds. "But it also means that if you learn to destroy your weak assumptions before reality destroys them for you, you can accomplish things that seem impossible. You can survive challenges that should destroy you. You can build civilizations that last not because they resist change, but because they use change as the foundation for growth." The galaxy would never be the same. Within a decade, human influence had transformed every aspect of galactic civilization. Not through conquest or political manipulation, but through the simple process of humans being human. Seeing problems that others missed, finding solutions that others hadn't considered, and approaching every challenge with the assumption that impossible was just another word for not yet achieved. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, but a civilization that learns to destroy its own limitations becomes something that the universe itself cannot overcome. Humanity had not just joined galactic civilization, they had taught it how to evolve. And in the vastness of space, where ancient threats stirred and new challenges waited beyond the edge of known reality, that evolution would determine not just the survival of a single species, but the destiny of intelligence itself in a universe that had no obligation to preserve it. The laughter had stopped. The real work was just beginning.